I will start with Modern Times, which is one of the first films that I loved a lot and I could watch for very many times because it speaks to me on a lot of levels, and it's one of the first films that I could show to my children, and it works for them as well and as it worked for me. When we were children, we couldn't watch, I don't know, a lot of films, but this is one of the films that was screened very often, showed very often on TV, so I know it by heart. And it still has a few scenes which I consider to be memorable. I still like to watch this from time to time with my children, especially that moment when they bring this machine which is supposed to feed people while working. I find that to be a great moment, especially because every 5 seconds there is that thing that tries to clear his mouth, which I like a lot. So I think that in order to, I don't know, have a little bit of an education for children before they just watch American cartoons, it's good to start with this kind of silent films, which I like a lot. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about my childhood is this Decalogue. In the 80s, they were not having enough funds in Romania, enough money to keep on buying films. So they started trading films with the other socialist countries. So for a period we couldn't be watching a lot of cinema in the theaters, we could only watch TV. And this became a cult film with us, the Decalogue. And when I got to the film school, the decisive question was to comment a fragment from the Decalogue. So it has a very special meaning to me. I still remember that moment because it brought me to the film school. A third film which I could watch back home when I started watching a little bit of older cinema was Bicycle Thieves. At some point they started having this itinerant cinematheque in Romania, and they were always like the same films, not too many, but we could watch, I don't know, Tarkovsky, Fellini, Antonioni, Visconti, stuff like this, a few Japanese films. But for me what was important was to discover the strength of this Italian neorealism. And later on in the film school I watched this film several times, and I think that somehow it became part of my education about and desire of just making very realistic films in which most of the tension is coming from things that could happen to everybody. And then two films that I like a lot. I don't remember when I've seen Blood Simple for the first time, but I liked it a lot, and I became a fan of these people. And it was very funny for me to get that old that I met him later on in Cannes, years after watching this film, which I can still consider to be very, very strong and very good. And I was even in a jury in Cannes when they were having a film, which I thought is very funny in closing this kind of circle. And last but not least, this is a film, Easy Rider, with a special kind of impact for me in history, because at some point something strange happened to me. I finished my first film, and I was flying back to Romania from some festival in Korea somewhere. And once I got to Europe, I got this million messages on my telephone that Dennisa Hopper wanted to meet me, which, that looked as a very funny piece of information. So I flew back to Romania, and what was happening is that Dennisa Hopper was shooting as an actor, a film in Bucharest, and he stayed so long that he met the local community of expats, and somebody gave him a screenplay, just for an opinion. But instead of just delivering this opinion, he decided he wanted to direct that thing. And he gave it to his Romanian producers, for which he was working, that it was a B-series film. And they told him, look, this film is about the Romanian Revolution, so the screenplay is not very good. You need a local writer that could write in English. And they checked into their telephones, and actually there weren't too many writers who had written something in English, and they found me. I had written a screenplay which got an international award, so it was translated. And Hopper read the screenplay, and we met in 24 hours, and he watched my first film. So I think that a week from that moment I was in Wilmington, Carolina here, and for 2 months I spent time with him rewriting that screenplay. And I think the experience was better than the screenplay, but it brought me closer not only to his films, but to him as a character, and he was a character.